Hi everyone, welcome back to my channel. Today I'm sharing with you guys my top 10 eyeshadow palettes of all time. Now, I'm not the first person to do this video. There are several creators here on YouTube who have done this video as well. But essentially what it is if you could only keep 10 eyeshadow palettes out of your whole entire eyeshadow palette collection, which 10 palettes would you choose and why? And for me, this video was actually fairly difficult. I still kind of knew my top 4 or 5 eyeshadow palettes, but the rest after that to fill the top 10 were fairly difficult. You know, I don't really keep anything in my collection that I don't like or I don't use. So it was very hard for me to put some palettes over the others. But after swatching and much deliberation, I sort of kind of came up with my top 10 eyeshadow palettes to share with you guys. So coming in at number 10 is my Jeffree Star Jawbreaker palette. Now, I know a lot of people are going to be like, why a colorful eyeshadow palette? And, you know, that is the reason it is in my top 10. Now, it is at number 10 because I don't use a lot of colorful eyeshadows. I don't do a lot of colorful looks. But I do enjoy having the option of having colorful eyeshadows, and the formula in this Jawbreaker palette is just wonderful. These mattes are so creamy and blend so well in the eye that they are not patchy, they are not stiff, they are just really wonderful, and that is the reason why this is palette number 10. So coming in at number 9 is my Huda Beauty Nude palette. Now, if I'm not wearing a neutral brown look on my eyes, I am wearing those pinky mauvey purple tones, and that is exactly what this palette is. I find I get the most perfect pink light sultry look when I use this. There are so many mattes, there are a great amount of shimmers, and there are even 2 glitters, and I find I could do a lot with this palette. Now, the only thing I really hate about this palette, there's 2 things. The first is I really wish there wasn't a concealer shade in here. Now, this formula is not great for my eyes. I have dry skin but really oily lids, and I find that this concealer shade does absolutely nothing for keeping my eyeshadow in place. Also, I get a lot of powder in this cream shade. Now, instead of that, I really wish they would have added a darker purple aubergine tone instead of these 2 that it already has. I find this palette lacks a little depth when I do a look, and sometimes I feel that I have to reach into another palette that has a deeper purple to darken the outer crease and add depth to my eyes. But overall, I really enjoy this palette, and I do get a lot of use out of it. Number 8 is the Anastasia Soft Glam palette, and this is the most perfect warm tone neutral palette. If I want a great neutral eyeshadow look, I do reach for this one a lot of the times. The formula in here is just wonderful. It is one of the better formulas Anastasia has released. As you know, there are inconsistencies between her palettes, and this is one of the better formulas. I absolutely love the shade range in here. You have your lights and you have your darks, so you can create all types of looks with different types of depths. You can go light and soft, or you can go dark and sultry with this palette. And I find it is just the perfect array of warm tones that I absolutely love. And I find this is a staple in most people's collections. And if you don't have it, it is one of the neutral eyeshadow palettes that you definitely should own. Number 7 is another neutral eyeshadow palette, and that is the Urban Decay Naked Honey palette. Now, this palette has more yellowy golden shades to it than the Soft Glam palette did, and I absolutely love this golden and honey shade for my eyelids. I love neutral eyeshadow looks. They are my absolute favorite, but sometimes I don't like plain brown eyeshadows. So this Naked Honey palette gives me that more golden yellow option for my eyeshadows, and I absolutely love it. Now, the formula isn't the best. I do prefer Anastasia or Natasha palettes more than Urban Decay, but I find it is a good formula to work with. I find the mattes blend beautifully on the eyes, and the shimmers just work really well. I find, again, for shimmers, I need my finger or I need a damp brush, but overall, I think these shadows perform really well, and I just absolutely love the warm, golden, honey color story of this palette, and it is therefore a staple in my collection, and I reach for this a lot when I don't want a plain brown eyeshadow look. Like I said, it gives me a little more options. Number 6 is my Natasha Sunrise palette, and this is the most perfect pink orange palette. I do like warmer pink red tones on my eyes when I am not doing a neutral eyeshadow look, and I find that I get great looks every time I use this palette. And you know, this palette is a more affordable option for Natasha Denona. This is $65 versus her larger 15 pan palettes that are $129. But you know, you do get the smaller pan size, but these palettes are still huge. There's still a lot of product in it, and I do find this palette is a good value. But the shades in here are just wonderful. I love the color story, which is why it is in my top 10. I love the more sunset, sunrisey looks, as the palette name says, that I get when I use this, and I find I get so many looks out of it. You know, some palettes, when they're these colors like this, you tend to get the same eyeshadow look every time you use it, but when I use this palette, I get so many looks, and I absolutely love using this palette, and it is a staple in my collection if I want to wear colors. Number 5 is my Anastasia Norvina palette. As I mentioned earlier, I love the pinky mauvey purple tones, and this palette is just that. It is actually what I am wearing on my eyes today, and I absolutely love it. Now, the only downfall of this palette is these shimmer shades. This top row up here is so soft. You do have to work very carefully with these eyeshadows. I do find I have to do my eyes before I do my face makeup. But overall, I get such beautiful, shimmery pink and purple looks with this palette. And, you know, it is just so wonderful. And I never thought I would like this palette till I just kept using it and using it and using it. And it is just the quintessential purple palette. And I absolutely love it. I cannot live without this palette. It is my color palette, as I would say. As in, this is probably as bold as I get when it comes to color. But overall, the formula is one of the better Anastasia formulas, along with the Soft Glam palette. But this is just wonderful, and it is a staple in my collection, and I would recommend it if you really do like those purple pinky tones. Number 4 is my Pat McGrath Mothership 5 palette, also called the Bronze Seduction palette. I absolutely love this palette, and that is because I love Pat McGrath's formulas, especially her formulas for shimmers and glitters, which is what the majority of this palette is. And you know, I love that wet, shimmery, glittery look on my eyelids. And you know, generally that is what I go for when I'm going out or, you know, special events. I want that wet look on my eyes. And Pat McGrath's shimmer shades are just so wonderful. They are so special. They work so well. You know, I do find I need a damp brush or my finger to apply them sometimes, but they just shimmer and glitter more than any other shade I've ever seen from any other brand. And that is why I love this palette. And you know, the formula is just great. I wish, however, though, there were more matte shades. I do struggle with this palette with getting a good crease or transition shade. And you know, maybe if they took 1 or 2 of these out and added, you know, a little bit of a lighter brown than this one right here, it would probably be number 2, maybe number 1 in my collection. But for right now, it ranks at number 4, and it is a good staple to have, and it is probably my favorite out of all the Pat McGrath eyeshadow palettes that she has produced. 3 is my Tati Beauty Texture Neutrals Volume 1 palette, and I just generally love the concept of this palette and how it's laid out. I love how you get 6 different shades, but also you get 4 different formulas of each of those shades. You get matte, you get sequin, you get metallic, and you get glitter. And I find you can do anything with these shadows. You know, these mattes are super creamy, super pigmented. They're not patchy or dry. You know, I really enjoy the sequin formula, which is matte, but with some shimmer in it. And then, you know, I love shimmer on the lid, so these metallic shades are just great. Like I said, you know, this formula isn't different than other metallics, as in you do need a finger to apply them, or you do need a damp brush to really get that great shiny color payoff. And then for the glitters, I find this is one of the better glitter formulas I've ever used. I usually don't have to use a glitter glue or a glitter primer with these. I find that if I just apply them with a finger, they just last really well in the eye, and I don't get a lot of fallout, and they are one of the most long-wearing, less messy glitters I've ever tried. But then just overall, the color story of this palette is what makes it great. You get your 4 rows of really great neutrals that are going to work well on everybody. But then also you get the Pop of Color Poet, which is going to give you that pink look as well, which are one of my favorite colors to use on my eyes. And then also Memory over here, which is your black. You know, you're going to be able to get your smoky looks and add depth to looks as well. And I find that this palette is just overall a good go-to palette. I find it is probably going to be my go-to travel palette because I can get anything out of this palette, neutral and color, and it is just wonderful. And I can't wait to use this more than I already have and do a tutorial as well to show you guys this palette. So my number 2 eyeshadow palette is the Anastasia and Jackie Aina palette. And first of all, let's just talk about the packaging with this shifting color, this little holographic look to it. I absolutely am a sucker for the packaging of this palette, but the inside is where it really, really, really gets to me. This is probably the most happy medium for my favorite eyeshadows. I get my warm neutrals in here. Oh my goodness. And I get the pinks and purples that I absolutely love. And I find that when I use this palette, I just make magic happen. And then also the formula. Oh my gosh, this is the best formula Anastasia has ever released. Better than the Soft Glam, better than Mona Renaissance and Norvina. It is the best formula they have produced. And to have my favorite shades in this palette, like, this is what I live for. This is why I do makeup, is to just have magic all in one palette. And you know, this palette makes me less afraid of color. I am not afraid to do a colorful eyeshadow look when I do this palette. And you know, part of that is because of the formula. But oh my gosh, this is my number 2 palette. And you know, it would be my number 1 if I didn't love neutrals, and you will see what my number 1 palette is in a minute. But oh my gosh, there's so many shimmers, there's so many mattes. It was just the perfect palette for me. And I love this palette, and I get so much use out of this palette. So my number 1 palette, this is the palette I cannot live without. I use this palette so much, and it is just amazing. And it is my Natasha Denona Biba palette. And the reason why it is number 1 is because it is a neutral palette. I mainly use neutrals. And yes, I love my Soft Glam palette, but I find I'm a little bit limited because it is strictly just a warm palette. But also, like I said, the formula is a little more powdery, and you know, I do find you need to take a little more time to use it. But however, when you get a neutral palette combined with this Natasha Denona formula, you just get magic. Natasha Denona's formula is one of the best. Her mattes are so creamy and pigmented, not dry, not patchy, and you don't have to work hard at all with these shadows. And you know, her shimmers are great as well. Again, you need your finger or a damp brush to get some really, really good color payoff with shimmers, but hers are probably my favorite ones that I've used with a dry brush and still gotten a lot of pigment and color payoff. And this, like I said, this formula is just great, buttery smooth, all the shades. But also, it is a neutral palette, but you get different tones of neutral. You know, your top row up here is those warm neutrals. And you know, this middle row right here does lean a little more of that neutral undertone of a neutral brown. And you know, at the bottom, you get your cool tone browns, which I find that you can get anything and everything and with this palette. And it is just beautiful and wonderful and performs amazing on the eyes. And that is why the Natasha Denona Biba palette is my number 1 palette of all time. I hope everyone enjoyed seeing my top 10 eyeshadow palettes of all time. If you did, go ahead and give this video a thumbs up. Also, hit that subscribe button down below so you can keep up with all my future videos. Also, drop me a comment down below and tell me your top 10 eyeshadow palettes of all time. And if your collection isn't as large to come up with 10, tell me your top 5 eyeshadow palettes. Maybe just your top eyeshadow palette of all time. Anyways, I hope you guys enjoyed watching, and I will see you guys next time.